All right. Thank you, everybody. My name's David Green. I'm an alcoholic and an addict. Very grateful to be here. Grateful for a recovery date in Alcoholics Anonymous of October 8th of 1994. Very, very grateful for that. So it's good to see you, man. It's good to be here. It's good to see my good friend Dennis always. We talk on the phone regular, and he says when I'll answer the phone, we talk on the phone regular. And his lovely missus there, Miss Doris. I just love this lady, man. What a prayer. To listen to somebody pray, that's just amazing. That's such a gift. And my friend Peyton, of course, Peyton, he's one of those guys. You ever see a dog, he's so ugly, he's cute? That's Peyton. He's just ugly, but he's beautiful on the inside. And I just love the guy. We met a few years ago, and I tell you, man, he has helped me to grow spiritually probably as much as any man I know. So that'll happen to you if you're around here long enough and you sponsor very many guys, especially guys like him and like myself and probably like many of you that we're repeat offenders. We continue to come in getting beat up and get beat up and get beat up. I don't know how many people are through treatment for their very first time. Show of hands, not trying to pick on anybody. That's great, man. That's great. So the rest of us have probably been here before, and for me it was no different. I come from a small town, Vienna, Oklahoma. It's located over around Salisaw in that area. I wasn't born there, but that's where I was from, and that's where my journey started. When I was just a little bitty guy, I didn't know too much about anything in life, and I had an alcoholic stepfather. My real father was an alcoholic and died an alcoholic and never found the rooms. But he didn't make it. And so, he was a drug addict of the worst kind, and he was a womanizer and a manipulator, and he was dishonest, and he was just like me, and probably like most of you. So, the stepfather was a good man. He could do anything. It didn't matter what it was. He was a mechanic. He was a roofer. He was a plumber. He was, you name it, he could do it. And as long as he was sober, he done very well with that. The problem is he was just never sober. He was always drunk. And when he got drunk, he was a very violent drunk, and he abused me, and he abused my mother, and it was just a very bad deal from the very beginning. So I always lived in a lot of fear when I was young. I just did over that. And I didn't know how to react, and I didn't know how to act to people. I didn't know how to respond, any of that stuff. So I just would always react on emotion all the time, and that would get me into trouble. It just would. And so as the years went on, and the abuse continued whenever I was really young. Now, he had some older boys, and they were in a lot of trouble. They were sent away to like reformatory schools and stuff like that. And I can remember them coming around, and my mother was very mean to those guys. She didn't want them there, and she was just mean to them, cold, that silent scorn, and it was just all the time. So of course, they couldn't get to her because of him, but they could get to me, and that's what ended up happening. Is they abused me in a lot of ways that probably most of us have went through, and probably ashamed to talk about today. But it's not until we get that stuff out of us, man, that we begin to heal from that kind of stuff. So anyway, they came and they went, and that event happened, and there was a lot of shame and a lot of guilt and a lot of remorse. And as the years went on, the physical abuse with the stepfather continued until I was about 15 and a half years old. I think one day he had got me up. He wanted me up. He wanted me to go to school. Now, school really wasn't that important to him, but for some reason that day it was. And he sent me out, and he wanted me to get up and go to school, and we'd been drinking together. And he had turned me on to liquor before this event that happened that day. It was a life-changing event that happened to me that day, because he came in to get me up, and I wasn't able to get up, and he began to slap me around, push me around, and we wrestled out onto this porch, and we had this big wraparound porch, and he cut wood, and there was wood all around it, and he cut it in cords or ricks or whatever you want to call it. And so as he was slapping and beating me around there, just out of a moment of fear and anger, out of the peripheral of my eye, there was a stick of wood laying on one of those cords that was about 2 inches long and about 1.5 inches in diameter. And I remember grabbing that and just smacking him square in the head with it above the top of his eye, and it just cut him open deep, and he fell to the floor. And when he did, he began to bleed ferociously, and it scared me to death. And I knew I was in trouble. And in fact, he told me, he said, whenever I get up from this, I'm going to kill you. And I knew that he meant it with all of his heart. I knew he did because of the way he was. And so I made a decision based on self, and I will talk about that later on. I didn't realize that day I was being directed by something greater than me in my thinking. But what that voice said to me that day, kill him. Because he deserves it. He's done this, and I never thought anything about it. I took action based on that thought, and I beat that man to death with that stick of wood. Now, he didn't die instantly, but shortly after that, he died. And there was a lot of consequences that had to be paid for those actions, and I had to go pay them, and I did. And so I always felt like I was the victim. That shouldn't have happened to me. I get into all this scorekeeping and role playing and all this stuff in my head, this theater of lies that's constantly talking to me. And I'm unconscious of all this. I don't know any of this. And so I go to jail and I do what I have to do, and I do my time, and I get out of there, and I come out, and I meet a young lady, and by then, my life has really gone to crap. I mean, before I went to jail that day, I walked to a nearby park. There was a guy there. He had methamphetamine drawn up in a syringe. He stuck that in my vein and pulled the trigger, and man, it was on from there. I mean, if anybody in here has ever been hit with that, you know what that is. And it was no different. That phenomenon of craving that the big book talks about came, and it stayed. And I mean, it was like I would do anything to get that, no matter what it was, man. I can remember taking from my grandmother, she had an old vase of her 50th year wedding anniversary, and that man had been gone for many years, my grandfather, and I took it and I sold it, and it's just the insanity of that stuff, just on and on. So when I came out of jail, I met this little lady, and of course we're always going to change our life, and things are going to be better, and we're going to do okay, and I'm not aware of the thoughts that are going on in the background, and so one of the things that had happened to me the day that I struck that man with a stick of wood and took him out was my mother had came out, and she was very upset about what had happened. She was just terrified, and she said, I'm going to call the police. I'm going to have you arrested. You need to leave. And in my mind, that thought was, he's abused me from the time that I was little until I'm big, and not one time do I ever remember you calling the law, but now all of a sudden you're going to call the law. And so I was very, very resentful with her. And what I didn't know was subconsciously that put something in the back of my mind that stayed there for many years. So the way that I would treat and abuse women from then for the rest of my life until I got into recovery, and even some time thereafter, would I begin to behave that way. So when it came to women. So when I met this little lady, it was no different. Of course, we come on as a nice guy and all this stuff, but once we get into the relationship, the character shows up. So anything I tell the guys that I sponsor today and they get into a new relationship, wait for the character to show up. I mean, it's all going to be fun. It's all going to be exciting. It's going to be this, but just hang around a little bit. Wait, just wait. And sure enough, my character showed up again, and that was a very abusive marriage, not only physically, but mentally and emotionally. There's a lot of ways to abuse a person without putting hands on them, for sure. And so, and that's what happened. And then out of guilt and shame, I would drink, and I would drink, and I would drug, and I'd drug. And this was just an endless cycle. It never quit. And so the first time, we had a child together, and I knew nothing about being a dad, absolutely nothing. Didn't want to be a dad. She came to me, and she's like, I'm pregnant. And, of course, my first response, you sure it's mine? And so anyway, I remember she had went in that day. She'd went into labor, and I'd sat at the hospital most of the day, and they kept telling me it's going to be any time now, and I know nothing about any of this. So my mind speaks to me about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and they're telling me it's going to be just like any time now, but they've been telling me this all day, so it's probably not going to be any time now. And my mind tells me, I need to go outside and have a drink real quick, and I'll come right back. And that was on December the 22nd, and I didn't come home till January 2nd. And so I missed the birth, not only the birth of my son, but I missed Christmas, I missed New Year's, I miss all because I just went out to have one drink. And that's the kind of behavior and the thoughts that would follow me continuing from there on. we had another son about a year later, and after that was about my first time that I really had taken a shot at detox and recovery down in the southeastern Oklahoma in Tallahena. I'm from McAllister, so I'm Choctaw Indian, and very, very grateful for my tribe and for the ways of that. I went down there and I was able to detox for just a few days, and they came in and I found out that my other son had been born, and in a short time I was already asking to leave. I wanted out of there. I really do. I had no interest in getting sober. People like me would come up to speak, and I mean, they'd just go in one ear and out the other. I didn't want to hear any of that crap. And people were coming in, and, you know, they would talk to me in what they call a 12-step call. They would come in and they would talk to me. And you know, I just had no interest in any of that kind of stuff. So as time went on, though, you know, I ended up leaving there. And as time went on, within a week. And what had happened was they gave me antabuse. The guy said, I've got something I can give you. I want to give you this. And he gave me a prescription for antabuse. And he said, now I want to tell you, if you drink on this, he said, there's a good chance you could die, but you're most definitely going to be sick. And so I thought, yeah, okay, no problem. So I took the antabuse and I began to take it. So I leave, in less than a week, my mind starts talking to me. You know what? She knows she's not doing right, talking about the ex-wife. The head's yapping at me. Resentments and fear start up. I don't know any of this is going on subconsciously in my mind, but this is absolutely what's happening. And I'm starting to get restless, and I'm starting to get irritable, and I'm starting to get discontent. And the next thing you know, my mind tells me, I think it'd be all right if you took a drink, because that guy's probably lying. Him and her probably got together and figured this all out. No telling what he gave you, but I mean, it's not going to make you that sick, surely. And I took action based on that thought. And I drank on that antabuse, and I tell you, that was one of the worst experiences of my life. He was right. I about died from that deal. I can remember my eyes, just every time my heart beat, I could feel it in my eyeballs, you know. I broke out in a rash. I was just sicker than I had ever been. And so we got past that situation, and in 1987, I was arrested on a drug charge in McAllister, and they rounded up a bunch of us after about 14 months and took us in. And so I had to, here I was already, you know, a felon, and now I'm facing this charge, and it was just a bad deal. So anyway, you know, moving on through that, just the insanity. She ended up leaving me. We moved to Indiana for a while to get away from the law, most likely. For me, anyway, that was my story. For her, she had family there, and she wanted to go there, so I thought it was a good break. We would just get out of there. Well, I get out there, and she leaves me. I mean, it was like, while we was in Oklahoma, she didn't make that move. But as soon as we got to Indiana and she had the supportive family, she left. And, you know, I didn't blame her for that now, but then I very much blamed her. And so after a time, she decided that she wanted to start dating again. And by now I'm living on the streets and I'm homeless, and my sons are there. I mean, I can't leave. Where can I go? I mean, I can't come back. I don't want to leave them. And so what happens is she starts dating this guy. I don't have any job. I don't have any money, and I'm living on the streets. And I start going to this plasma center to sell plasma out of my body so that I can get enough money to drink. And I meet a guy there, and this guy's a con. He's a con. And I'm a con, but this guy's a con. And, man, he took it to a new level with me. And we were sitting in a bar having a drink one night. You know, we had about $8 between us, because, you know, plasma will bring about $8 per arm. And so we're sitting there and we're having a drink. And he said, man, I can't believe you let that guy date your wife the way that he does. And he starts talking to me. And the more he talks to me, the more rage I get in. And I'm thinking, yeah, you're probably right. And so what happens is we end up kidnapping this dude and taking him to a nearby lake in Indiana and tying him to a tree with duct tape and taking a water hose filled with sand. And it was a bad scene. And now I'm in trouble in Indiana. I can't come back to Oklahoma, and I'm running out of places to go, and I don't know what to do. And so I call my mother. I don't have any choice but to leave and to come back to Oklahoma. And so I come back, and, you know, luckily, she ended up letting the two boys come back for a while with my mother because she wanted to pursue her life and move on. And that was just a bad deal. It just got worse and worse and worse as time went on. So by the grace of God, I didn't end up back in prison again, but I ended up back in jail many times after that. And in 1993, I guess it was, toward the end of that, maybe in 94 there, early 94, I got into some trouble one evening, and it was up around my mother's house, and she'd called the police, and, I had to flee. And I can remember going to near the Jack Fort Mountains down in southeastern Oklahoma, and there were some guys down there, and that's outlaw country down there. I mean, planes have flew in, and they've shot them down. It's just like, I love that place. And so those guys told me, "You're welcome to come here." And I'm like, "Oh, thank you, God. Finally I got somewhere to go." And they told me, "You're welcome to come here, man. You can hide out here as long as you want." And I'm not just talking about a mountain. I'm talking about mountains. And so everything is going well, but I start drinking moonshine whiskey that day with those guys. Man, life is good. Law can't get me up here. Lots of moonshine. We're cooking it. I mean, things are great. I get drunk and start a fire, and I'm bad to start fires whenever I get drunk. I burned down a few houses and one bar and part of a mountain that night. And oh my God, them guys were upset, and I mean bad. And they were going to kill me. And so I finally got away from that situation and got down the mountain. And what happened was I ended up down in Tallahena, really pretty much begging for the Choctaw Nation Recovery Center to take me in down at Tallahena. I went to my tribe and I just told them, I said, "Look, man, I'm in a bad way. This is what's going on, this, and this." And they said, "Well, we can bring you in for treatment, but we can't promise you won't get incarceration when you leave. I mean, we can't promise that." And so, I came in that time, and I don't know what happened to me. I know now today that it was the grace of God. But they started showing me the ceremonial ways, and they taught me the sweat, and they taught me the vision quest, and they taught me all of the things that I needed to know about my traditional beliefs, and I loved it. I just fell in love with that immediately. For the first time I ever sweat, it was almost like I'd sweat almost 30 years of drugs and alcohol out of me that day. It was a powerful experience for me. It was one that was just unbelievable. Now, there was one of those guys in there. He was a full blood, and he was Alcoholics Anonymous, and he knew the big book in a big way, better than anybody, just about anybody that I have ever met. And so he would teach us the big book, as we went along, and, we'd read it and think, "Oh, that's cool, and that's cool, and that's cool." Well, the day came whenever, after 2 years, I got to see my sons, and, they came one day to visit, and we had a good time in the afternoon. And my ex-wife had told me during that time, she said, "Look, my grandfather, I don't know if you know this, but he's been a member of Alcoholics Anonymous for a long time, and he's got quite a few years of sobriety. So I know the miracle of what that program can do. And if you'll give yourself to that program, you'll apply yourself to that program, and you do what it asks you to do, and you change your life, I'll give you a relationship back with these kids. I just will." And that was huge for me at that time. And so I said, okay. And so I don't know if I come out of there, with those hopes beyond, because you hear it all the time, if you don't do it for you, and I do believe that's true, but I do believe that there was some incentive there with having my sons. And so I came out, and for the first, 5 or 6 months, I really got depressed after being sober, just going to meetings. I was going to meetings like I was told to do. I was getting depressed, man. I was seeing guys get up there and get 30 days and 60 days and 90 days chips, and life has changed, and life is wonderful, and I'm miserable, and I don't know what's going on with me. And so it was about 1 week before I was to go to get my sons for the first time. The youngest one drowned in Lake Monroe, Indiana. I'm like, golly, man. It's like, this is why God sobered me up right here, and of course it's all about me still. This is why God sobered me up, I'm me. And I don't realize any of that at the time, but I realize it now. And so anyway, by the grace of God, I stayed sober through that, and that's the story in a nutshell. I don't want to get away from that. I want to talk about what happens when we come here. I knew I was going to drink. I knew it beyond a shadow of a doubt. I put that boy, my one son came back home for the summer while we buried the other one, and I put him on a plane in Tulsa, Oklahoma, sent him back to Indiana, and I was headed to the liquor store to get a drink, and I hadn't drank in 9 months. And I remember one thing that one of the counselors had told me down there at the Native American Treatment Center. He told me, if you ever feel like you're in a place, and you probably will, that you're going to drink, you need to pick up the phone and call somebody. He said, don't call me after you drink. You call me before you drink. And if you do that, I'll help you. Now, I didn't consciously make a decision to say, okay, I'm going to do this so that I don't get it. No, I think the grace of God, I know the grace of God entered, and it did something for me I couldn't do for myself that day. And I stopped and made a phone call, and I called that guy. And he offered his condolences, and he said, man, I want to ask you a couple of questions. He said, I see you at the meeting every time the meeting doors open. I hear you mumble how it works under your breath. You've memorized that from the script. You can read the steps off the wall and all this stuff. He said, what do you know about the program of Alcoholics Anonymous? And I said, well, plenty. You just said it. Every time the doors are open. He said, no. You're referring to the fellowship. I'm talking about the program as outlined in the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. What do you know about the program? So I know quite a bit about the program. I read that book every meeting. He said, you don't seem to understand. You don't even know what the problem is, let alone the solution. I said, I know what the problem is. And he said, what's the problem? And I said, the problem's alcohol now, and the problem is drugs. He said, I thought you were sober for 9 months. And I said, I am. And he said, well, if that was the problem, don't you think the problem would have went away 9 months ago? I thought, wow. He said, that's not the problem. If the problem's alcohol and drugs, whatever day you came in here, however long you've been sober, that day the problem should have been gone. But if this continues to show up and continues to gnaw and nag and drive you in different directions and starts bringing insanity back into your life, then you've met the real problem. And see, I didn't know any of this. And so he set me down. He put me into the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous. He took me into the doctor's opinion. He showed me the first step. It said we admitted we were powerless over alcohol. Our lives had become unmanageable. I think all I needed to do, my thoughts was all I needed to do was go into a meeting and admit I was an alcoholic and that I'd worked the first step. That ain't even close. I don't even come close to what that first step is. There's 88 pages in the big book that outline the directions on how to work the first 11 steps. 43 of those pages are on step 1. 43 of them. That's almost half. So I laugh at people whenever I hear them say that they work the first step every day. Well, just because I stayed sober today doesn't mean that I worked the first step in its entirety all day long. There's a whole lot to that first step. It says we are powerless over alcohol. There's 3 areas to that step, not just 2, 3. I'm powerless over alcohol for 2 reasons. Once I put it in my body, there's something within my body that won't allow me to stop taking it. I crave it. Same way with the drug. Same day that day at the park when he hit me with that needle. That craving hit me that day. And I was never able to get loose from that for many years. So if that's the problem, then the only thing I need to do is not drink, and there shouldn't be any more problem because I don't have alcohol in my body no more. But that's not the only problem. Once I stop, this thing shows up. And it shows up mad, and it shows up resentful, and it shows up fearful, and it shows up deceitful and dishonest. And it's everybody else's fault. It's not mine at all. And so the obsession to the mind kicks in. The first 23 pages from the doctor's opinion, from Bill's story, the first 23 pages in the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous, deal with nothing but that physical allergy, which is the first part of that powerlessness. From 23 to 43, 20 more pages, it deals with nothing but the mind and what happens to us after we've been sober, after we've come to treatment, after we've been to meetings, after we've done all we can do, and we relapse over and over and over and over and over. That deals with that. I'm powerless for 2 reasons, body and mind. Once I put it in, I can't stop. Once I take it out, I can't stay stopped. I can't stay away. I'm trapped. I got a body that cannot process alcohol, drugs, lust, and I got a mind that can't process reality. I'm trapped. I'm powerless. And so when I see this, I'm able to accept it. And I know outside of some kind of a divine help, I'm not going to be able to overcome that. And so we begin to look at unmanageability. The first half of that step, I'm powerless over alcohol, that's what brought me here. The last step of it the last half of it's what keeps me here. My life's unmanageable, and it continues to be unmanageable unless it's managed by a power greater than self. So anyway, we begin to look at the unmanageability, this gaping hole within that nothing can fill up. We've tried everything. We've tried new jobs. We've tried new women. We've tried more, new toys, more cars, more this, more that. I don't know about you, but none of that stuff ever worked. I tried it all. None of that worked. I can't get over this empty feeling I got inside of me, man, and I don't know what's going on. So if I'm powerless in step one, then obviously the answer is power in step two. And if insanity is driving me out the door over and over and over, then obviously sanity is the answer, and it's in step two. So it says came to believe. Well, right there I have a problem because I don't really like the way that I was brought up about God. He was vengeful, he was mean, and that might not have been what was said, but that's what I heard. But whenever it says those two words came to, that's past tense. I came to that years ago. It's not about me coming to believe in God. That step is not about me coming to believe in God. It's about me identifying beliefs that have been given to me by self. And there's a narrative within that every time I even hear a term like God, spirituality, prayer, meditation, that very term it just burns me up because I have a belief based on something probably that I either thought or learned whenever I was little. So that step's really telling me that I need to come to believe something greater than self. Take R off of that. Self can restore my sanity because I'm insane whenever it comes to these certain beliefs, these certain actions. And what's so crazy about the beliefs is I will take action on them and I'll think it's your fault that I had a bad time. I ended up in treatment the fourth time because she wasn't doing right. I ended up in prison because that man beat on me. No, I made a decision based on self that day. I should have walked away. I should have called the law. I should have done something. I had a decision to make, and I didn't make it. I took the decision out of my head, and I took action based on that. And we do it every day in our everyday life. Maybe not to that extreme, but we do that. And so I really began to understand step two and self, which is beliefs, ideas, concepts, prejudice, and ideas. This is powerful. Once I start to discover what's going on with me, the only thing that's really changed with me in all those years has been my beliefs in all of those things. I no longer believe about prayer what I used to. I no longer believe about God what I used to. How does that change? Well, first I identify it. I look what it's doing to my life. Does it serve me or not? Do I want to stay sober or not? Do I want to recover or do I not? Something greater than me has to restore me to sanity, and it's insane the way that I believe. And what's even more insane than that is I take actions based on those beliefs, and I get into all kinds of trouble. And there's where we begin to learn about what I call self. You may call it Satan, you may call it the devil, you may call it the ego. I don't care what you term it. This is exactly what it is, and this is exactly where it lives. This is an untreated mind. I have no recovery. Everything that I know is based on what I learned when I was a little child. And none of this stuff is serving me, and my life is going to crap, and I'm dying inside of the rooms, and I'm sober for 9 months. Yeah, drinking's the only problem. The only thing I need to do is quit drinking. Drugging, I just need to quit drugging. So, step three, we made a decision to turn our will and life over to the care of God as we understood Him. And the first thing I needed to understand, that was not asking me to give my life to God. It says we made a decision to turn our will and our life. That's not giving our life to God. That's turning it over. If I brought my son that drowned to you to take care of, I would expect you to do that until I could come back to get him. That's the same thing we're going to do here. We're going to hand our thinking, which is our will. We're going to hand our life, which is our action. And that's the only thing we're turning over. Nothing more at this point. At this point, that's it. And I'm going to turn that over to whatever I call, whatever I term this higher power. I'm going to turn that over. And I'm going to walk through the rest of those steps. And when I do, my thought process is going to change. My actions are going to change, and I'm going to walk a new guy. And that's exactly what happened to me in the big book. So page 60 to 63 in this book really begins to talk about the self. It begins to identify it. It says, he may be kind, considerate. And if you'll notice the words very carefully, they start with a capital H. So here's where I begin to identify from the belief. I always thought David was worthless, and David was sorry, and David was no good, and David was damaged beyond repair, and David was this, and it wasn't David. It was self. And I don't realize this. and I start disidentifying from self. I start, every time this narrative starts yapping, you know what, she's wrong, you need to tune her up a little bit, or him, or whoever it is. Now I've got eyes on that. I can turn to this power, my thinking and my actions, which is my will in my life, to God as we understood him. So you'll hear in the meetings a lot, God as we understand him, but it's underlined twice. God as we understood him. What I understood in year 1 is different from what I understood in year 5. What I understood in year 10 is different from what I understood in year 15 and 20 and 25. And almost 30 years later now, I have understood different as I've grown. So it's not God as if I understand him. If I understand him, I'm done. That's it. I understand. I don't need him more. It's not that. Understood. And so I begin to take the steps out of the book. I get into the 4th step. I start writing and listing these resentments. I start taking a look at those things square in the face. And what this shows me is not who I am. I used to write those for years, and I'd look and I think, God, look at you, David. Look at you, look at you. But see, it's not me. It's not who I am. It's who I become based on a narrative was given to me by self. I've taken actions based on that, and here's my life on paper in front of this inventory. And I'm like, oh my God, oh wow. And so for the first time, I'm seeing the part that I acted. Now, I'm accountable for everything I ever done. Don't get me wrong. But I can promise you, I'm not responsible for that. And the first time I said that to my wife, she threw a fit. She was like, really, that wasn't you in the bed with that woman up there? I said, yeah, that was me. And she said, you're not responsible for that. And I said, no, I'm not. And she said, don't ever say that to newcomers. I'm here to tell you, I say it to every newcomer I run across, because we are directed by something much different. And until we contact a power greater than ourselves, that director is going to remain the same. We get a new director in step 3. Our thoughts begin to change, therefore our actions begin to change. And if we take the rest of the steps as they're outlined in the big book, we will have a new experience and we won't be the same guy. I'm not the same man I was 28 years ago. I'm not the man I was 10 years ago. My recovery has continued to grow and grow and grow as I've continued to grow in the program as God as I understood him, not God as I understand him. So I move into the resentments. And I look at all of this stuff, and I begin to see, and I do it exactly as the book says. I don't get away from the book ever. If anybody comes to me and they've got something different to do in this book, good luck to you. I ain't got time for that. I've tried any of that, and for me, this has been the only thing that has ever worked for me. Not only has it got me sober, it's got me into a conscious contact with a power greater than myself, and it's helped me to grow into a good life. And so, I took the rest of the steps. I looked at my fears. What I realized, they wasn't my fears. It says self-reliance with a small s. So what I begin to realize is every time a fear crops up, I rely on self to try to get rid of it. Even though I've prayed, even though I've talked to somebody else, I'm going to go do my own thing. I'm going to go try to do this or this or this to get out of that fear. And you know what happens? I don't get out of that fear. And even if I get out of that one, there's another one waiting. The book says we have been driven by 100 forms of fear on page 62 of the book. If I've been driven, I'm not the man behind the wheel. You can bet on that. I'm not the guy behind the wheel. Now, I'm along for the ride. Don't get me wrong. I'm accountable for everything I've ever done. But I'm not the driver here. Fear is. And that is an emotion that comes from self. The book says we have made decisions based on self. And that put us in a position to be hurt. Self manifested in various ways is what had defeated us. There's 2 words that jump at me there. One is self, the other is us. We're going to look at our addiction, our alcoholism, as a flea. And look at self, these thoughts, these beliefs, these concepts, as a bug. These fleas will change. I went through them all. I went through alcoholism, drug addiction, sex addiction, gambling. The flea changed. The flea always changed to something else. But the bug never changed. He's always the same. The flea is not the problem. The bug is the problem. Get the bug. The fleas are gone. And that's what happened. I ended up getting sober. I began to recover through the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I began to attend meetings. I started sponsoring a lot of guys. I met Charlie of Joe and Charlie. He became my sponsor. Charlie showed me so much about the big book. I'm forever grateful for that guy. I rode on the coattails of that for years. Oh, yeah, I'm Charlie's guy. That's all crap. I ended up in sex addiction and about died. Man, I was like, oh, my God, I couldn't get away from that stuff. And, I just didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to tell anybody about it, any of this. And today I can stand from the podium no matter where I go, and I can talk about that today because I've found recovery from it. In 2019, I was exposed for everything that I'd been hiding in secret. The bug was still around. The flea had changed a little bit, but the bug was still there. And I was able to get free in 2019, and I became a member of Sexaholics Anonymous, not only Alcoholics Anonymous. And for the first time, I had to face that, and the shame of that stuff was awful, man. It was awful. And I walked into that room, and I seen those guys that were there to help me, and I thought, man, look at these pitiful people. They ain't even got a clue about anything going on in the program. I'd be happy to teach them. I'm the sixth man in the room. And I sat down, and I began to listen to these guys. And I began to apply what they said to do. Now, I noticed after a time, I wasn't going to be able to keep doing that and stay sober in that area. What I did, I come back and did what I always do. I went to the big book. I went back through the steps in that area. I identified self. I really began to move past that. And on October 1st, which was last month sometime, I celebrated more than 3 years in that fellowship. In August of this past year, I celebrated 28 years in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm grateful for recovery. Guys, it works. It works, man, if you're willing to put in the effort to work it. I talked to a guy, man, if I can tell he's insincere and not serious, I don't have time to fool with that. I just don't. And it's not because I'm better than him. It's not because my time is more important than him. It's just that my recovery is more important than that. And if a guy ain't ready to get sober, there ain't nothing I can do to try to change his mind. So I've had to learn about all that stuff. As you leave from here, man, one of the things for me was I walked back into an old neighborhood that I came out of, and there was a lot of people waiting on me there, man, a lot. And I had to face those people, man, and it wasn't easy to tell them, man, I'm trying to do something different with my life. There's where the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, whatever fellowship you're in, there's where that comes in, because you got brothers in there that can support you and find somebody that can sponsor you, put you into the big book. If a man says, you admit you're an alcoholic? Yeah, okay, you've worked step 1. You believe in God? Yeah, you worked step 2. You ready to do a prayer? No, you've done 3. Stay away from that dude. I'm telling you, that dude will kill you, and not even meaning to. He just will. Because it was a wonderful thing what they done back in the day whenever they took the steps and put them on the wall. But where they messed up was they left the directions on how to work those steps inside of this book, and not very many ever open this book and begin to take a look at it. And so our prayer in the 3rd step says, God, I offer myself to thee. And I need to think carefully before I even make that sentence on that one statement, because I'm offering to do what he wants to do with me, and I don't know what that looks like. It says, relieve me of the bondage of self. It doesn't say relieve me of the bondage of lust. It doesn't say relieve me of the bondage of booze. It doesn't say relieve me of the bondage of drugs. Relieve me of the bondage of self, because those are the fleas. Those are not the bug. Relieve me of the bondage of self. And it's not even for my sake, but so I can better do his will. That's why I'm taking that step. Take away the difficulties so that victory over all those difficulties of that bug, I can bear witness to other brothers, people I can help with that power, love, and way of life. That's why I'm here today. That's why I'm here. I made that covenant with God in 1994. I fell short of that many times. See, I always thought the straight line. You got to work that straight line. But as I walk a straight line and I look back, there's many times where I fell off that path. Different fleas showed up. It's not the straight line. It's the times you got off the path and came back. If you stay off the path, that's on you. You come back to the path. That's just a mistake, man. That's just a mistake. And that's all it is. It's not a life sentence. It's a mistake. I made a lot of mistakes in my worldly life before Alcoholics Anonymous. I've made a lot of mistakes in Alcoholics Anonymous. I split an entire group apart with lust addiction once I was discovered. Everything that I'd ever worked for was in jeopardy. It was about gone. Today, there's none of that going. It's not there, man. I made a mistake, and I got another chance, and we get another chance, and another chance. And, we serve a God of 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th chances, and it's on and on and on. It's a mistake, not a life sentence. And so I love the program of recovery. I got into the oil field in 2000, and I don't even know, 2002. It seems like I worked that for many years, and I had a lot of success in that area. After that, I ended up coming home and spending a lot of time just kind of bouncing around, not sure where I was wanting to do, suffering from a lot of lust and acting out during those years, and just kind of falling from one place to the other. I've worked around the Oklahoma City area, El Reno, all that, Elk City, all that, a lot, and did a lot of travel and stuff. And finally, in 2019, when I was discovered, man, I was pinned. I was in a place where I didn't know what was going to happen to my life. I just didn't. And God ended up really, restoring my marriage and giving me a good career. Today, I drive a semi-truck. And it turned out it's awesome. It's an easy job. It's all I do is drive pretty much, And, but I liked it, and I just thought this is a wonderful thing. But it was quickly revealed to me this wasn't for me. This was for God. This was for this power. And what happened was I had a dude call me one day, and he said, "You got some time to talk?" Yeah, I got all day, man, And so we began to talk. And then another guy called and he said, "You got some time to talk?" And this started going on and on through my days. And I would ask each one of these men, "Have you been through the steps in Alcoholics Anonymous?" Yes, I have. Yes, I have. "Have you been through the steps as they're outlined in the big book, Alcoholics Anonymous?" "No, I haven't." "Well, that might be why you're struggling in your sobriety. That's why I was." And so I began to start working these men through the steps as outlined in the book, and I was able to do that while I drove down the road. They would read, I'd read, and we would break this down, and we would look at this very closely. We would look at step 1 in depth, 2, 3, 4. I get them into inventory. They begin to write. I get a guy to inventory, then I wouldn't have to talk to him so much anymore because he was away writing inventory. That allowed me to pick up another one. I get him to inventory, and this went on and on and on. And after a small period of time, I ended up sponsoring about 30 to 35 men that were all sex addicts and alcoholics. And what has happened is we've become a small group unto our own. We're known as the Freedom Seekers, and we have found freedom from that, and we continue to seek that continuously through this power, which I call God. And it's been a great deal. It really has. And today I love my job. I'm on it all the time. I got really sick a while back, and I don't know if it was some strand of COVID. I don't know what it was. They couldn't figure out what it was. And I kept going to doctors and going to doctors and going to doctors. Finally, I turned back to my tribe. I turned back to the elders, and I said, "Man, I need help. I don't know what's going on." And they can't seem to fix me. And these dudes took me down. They took me to a sweat, man, and I sweat. And immediately I began to feel a little bit better. But then they took me down, and I'm part Cherokee too, so they took me down, and we did the Cherokee water treatment. And they showed me the natural herbal plants like mullein, and they showed me how to clean it and make a tea out of it. And that opened up my airway, and I began to breathe. And they gave me other natural resources that I could turn to. And that started taking away the burning in my lungs. And slowly I began to heal. And as I continued to go back to these men and go back to these men, I didn't want to go back to them just for what I could get. I wanted to go back so what I can learn to pass on to other people. And I started doing this, and I started working with my shaman regularly, and he began to teach me about the spirit of all things. Everything God created has spirit. Everything man created does not. I began to listen to the birds. When it would rain, I began to listen to the rain, the wind. There's something talking to me. I need to shut up and listen, and that's my problem. I don't know how to shut up. And so I'm learning how to shut up, and I'm learning how to listen. I'm listening to these things, and I'm starting to connect with all things, and all of a sudden there's a whole world that opens up on the outside of me. So now it's just not all about my fellow brother, which it is, don't get me wrong, but it's about all things that God created that has spirit. And I promise you, you and me have spirit. We were created by a loving God. We've made mistakes, yeah. So I come into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was met with so much love and so much welcome and so much brotherhood. You can't tell me that there's not a loving God, because on that day, whenever that day, whatever that day that I pass over or cross over it is, if a bunch of drunks could accept me like that as a brother, how much more could that power accept me? Came to believe right then in a new way. And my journey has walked free ever since. I emotionally got free in 2020. I sobered up from lust in 2019. But in 2020, I walked emotionally free for the first time in my life, man. I've not had many hang-ups since. I love my life today. I love sharing it with other people. And I like what we do here, man. You guys are absolutely in the right place. It may not feel like it. It may not seem like it. Don't trust your feelings. I've learned that a long time ago. Read about Fred in the big book over there around page, 38, 39, and 40. Read about Fred. He felt good. Not a perfect day, not a cloud on the horizon. It was a perfect day, and Fred got drunk. And that was the same way with David, over and over and over. If I'm based on feelings, every time I sat in the bar, had a pretty girl in my lap and a drink in front of me and a needle full of dope, I felt pretty good. It's not about feelings. It's not about feelings. It's about getting in touch with that part of self, facing that demon and walking away from it. And, man, what a great God we serve. I'm really glad to be here with you guys today, man. Thanks for letting me come out and share.